greet you in the same way. The question that I want to deal with for a few minutes this morning, and I am cognizant of the time, was what I put on our Shabbat flyer this week that was sent out on Thursday. What does it mean? What does it mean to wrestle with God? Now, there is a famous episode in this week's Torah reading, Parshat Vayishlach, where Jacob wrestles with a man who we're told turns out to be an angel. All night long, he wrestles with this individual. Jacob is preparing for an encounter, as I told you before, with his brother Esau, whom he hasn't seen in 20 years. He's worried that Esau may still want to kill him after he deceitfully stole Esau's blessing all those years ago. And after getting his camp set up by the side of the stream, the Torah tells us that Yaakov was left alone, kept his family out of the way, didn't want any trouble. If there was a war, he didn't want his family killed. He was alone. And a man wrestled with him until the break of dawn. And when he saw, when this angel had seen that he had not prevailed against him, he wrenched his hip out of its socket, so that the socket of his hip was strained as he continued wrestling. And then he said, the angel said to Jacob, "Let me go, dawn is breaking." But Jacob answered, "I will not let you go unless you bless me." And said the angel to Jacob, "What is your name?" He replied, "My name is Jacob." He said, "No longer shall your name be Jacob, but from now on your name shall be Israel, Yisrael. For you have striven with God and men and prevailed." Now, needless to say, there is a lot of rabbinic interpretation over this enigmatic story. Just who or what was Jacob wrestling with? Rashi shares an interpretation from the Midrash that Jacob was in fact wrestling with Esau's guardian angel, like I said earlier. Chizkuni, who is a 13th century French rabbi, expands on this idea and says that Esau's protective power had come to prevent him from escaping. But this angel came to realize God's promises to Jacob, which were strong enough to protect him from being harmed by Esau. And then you have the Radak, who's another 13th century French rabbi, who takes a totally different approach. He says, God sent this angel in order to strengthen Jacob. If Jacob could prevail over this angel, then he could prevail easily over Esau, and he could be certainly the leader of what would be now the children of Israel. Now, these are all very somewhat literal interpretations, and I think it's better to understand this passage more metaphorically than physical and literal interpretations. Jacob wasn't in a literal wrestling match with a divine being. He wasn't struggling with God so much as he was struggling with the idea of God. It was dark. It was dark night. Jacob was alone. Jacob was afraid and was probably feeling abandoned by God, that he's got to deal with his brother now on his own, who's out to kill him with a retinue of 400 men. God had made all these promises to him about becoming the father of a great nation. Yet here he stands on the side of a river about to be killed, seemingly on the brink of destruction. So where is God now? Where are the promises that God made? It's a very telling story that at the end, as the dawn breaks, Jacob receives a blessing and he receives a new name, Yisrael. For those of you who don't know, Yisrael means struggle with God. And the name Israel becomes the name of the Jewish people. And ultimately the name of the Jewish state, Medinat Yisrael, the state of Israel. There is something essential in Judaism which is unique to Judaism, which is that of struggling with God. Many other religions seem to try to minimalize the struggle by answering what we call doctrinal questions for the faithful. Many Christian denominations, especially the Catholics, have what's called a catechism, a big fat book detailing exactly what proud Catholics are expected to believe. What they have to believe in, they can't think for themselves. The tradition of standardizing theological doctrine goes back to the 4th century, when the Emperor Constantine, he converted to Catholicism. And he got so tired and so fed up with the bickering amongst the different bishops. You know, we thought that in Judaism, you have 2 rabbis, 3 opinions. But apparently it was exactly the same in Catholicism. And Constantine got fed up with it. And what did he do? He gathered all the bishops together, and he put them in a room in the Turkish city of Nicaea, and he told them, you don't come out until you agree together on all these doctrinal issues. And thus the Nicene Creed was formulated, which is still a fundamental statement of Christian belief till this very day. We don't have a catechism in Judaism. It's a shame that Constantine didn't convert to Judaism, because then perhaps we'd all agree on something. Maimonides attempted to formulate one himself. In his famous 13 Articles of Faith that are summarized in the popular hymn Yigdal, which we sing on Friday night. But his contemporaries rejected it. Everybody wanted their own voice. They wanted their own idea. They didn't like this idea of a catechism. In the 19th century, Orthodox rabbis started using these 13 Articles of Faith as a sort of litmus test for whether someone was a good Jew or a heretic. But that approach is clearly contrary to what has been essential to Jewish faith for millennia. A strong belief, that is, that there are 70 faces, Shiva Panim la Torah, 70 faces to the Torah. That as we see in the arguments between Hillel and Shammai, Elu va'elu, divrei Elohim chayim. These and those are the words of the living God. In other words, we all have an opinion, and as long as it's argued in the name of God, nobody can say that their opinion is the only way. For example, one of Maimonides' 13 principles of faith is the belief in the resurrection of the dead. Tchiat hametim, revival of the dead. And I believe, it says, with perfect faith, that there will be a revival of the dead at the time when it shall please the Creator. In other words, the coming of the Messiah. And what do we say? We just said it just now. It says, blessed be his name, and his mention shall be exalted forever and ever on the revival of the dead. But believing in a physical resurrection does not appear anywhere in the Torah. While there are examples of the dead being brought back to life elsewhere in the Tanakh, we have Elijah, he prays and he raises a young boy from death. Elisha brings back a child to life. Nowhere is it said that everyone gets to be resurrected. Ezekiel's famous vision of the dry bones, where the prophet sees the flesh grow back on the bones, and the bones, or the body springing into life, it's viewed by some as some sort of prediction that the same will happen to all of us. But the understanding is certainly not universal among the rabbis. It's much more than an article of faith in Judaism that we wrestle with God. We struggle with God. And like Jacob, we try to understand God. We confront God. We confront our own doubts, our own fears. How do we Jews wrestle with God? What, do we just start talking to him and say, we're upset with you, we're ticked off with you, God? No. The way we wrestle with God is by studying the Torah. We don't find the answer in the Torah. We find answers, plural. And everyone who studies Torah comes to a slightly different understanding, a slightly different answer than everybody else. I had a Rosh Yeshiva once who said that if God had intended everybody to agree on their findings in the Torah, if every argument was supposed to come to one conclusion, he would have given us all a lobotomy. But he didn't. And he didn't for a reason. And the idea being is, because we're supposed to bring forth different ideas. That's how the Torah evolves. Today is Adult Education Shabbat, wherein we celebrate a group of God wrestlers. God wrestlers who have been studying Torah every Wednesday morning for years. We celebrate, and we're going to celebrate after the service, a siyum. We're going to celebrate the ceremony marking the completion of a set of Jewish studies. This year, the class focused on the haftarot of the book of Exodus, a book of hope, a book of patience, a book of love. Those are some of the highlights of what they learned. But our students, and I listened to sometimes on some of the Zoom calls that Elizabeth had, the students found that again and again, the prophets in the haftarot reinforced the message of the Torah. And just as in the Torah, Moses felt incapable of the mighty task God was assigning, so too the prophets had the same doubts. Moses struggled with God. Moses struggled was that he felt inadequate. You all remember the story because we talk about it at Passover at the burning bush. He told God, "Who am I that I go to Pharaoh? What if they don't believe me? What if they laugh at me, mock at me? I'm not a man of words. I'm slow of speech. I have a slow tongue." And in one of the haftarot, Isaiah had a similar objection. Why pick me? Why pick me for this message, God? Moshe and the prophets were intermediaries between the divine spirit and the people. Perhaps we can view the angel that Jacob wrestled with in the same way. We don't wrestle with God directly. God is beyond our grasp. But you know what? We wrestle, each and every one of us, every day, with the vision of God as presented by our prophets, by our Torah, and our angels. In the words of the prophets, the students who are here today, either physically or online, who took part in their studies, found a spiritual awakening prodded by the prophets. The people moved from worshipping idols to worshipping God. The book of Exodus, which our group studied, closes with the people in the desert having received the Ten Commandments and being given the instructions for building the Mishkan, the tabernacle, the portable sanctuary. A portable sanctuary that was created so that God could dwell among them. And at the very end of the book, the people are at the dawn of a new day. They've come through the harsh night of slavery in Egypt. They've come through the difficulties of fleeing oppression. They've been given the tools that they need. They've been given the instruction manual, the Jewish constitution, the Torah, and a sanctuary to keep God close. And they have hope for a brighter future in the promised land. It's exactly the same way. Jacob's struggle with God is over at dawn. And after a night of the soul, he prevails over his doubts and emerges ready for a new day, also with hope for a brighter future. And as the Radak said, the fact that the struggle lasted until daybreak was an allusion to Jacob, that after a period of night, after problems, after adversity, there would come a period of light, peace, and prosperity coupled with security. My friends, wrestling with God it's not a one-time thing. Just as day follows night, hope follows despair, we know that we are all going to have to face additional challenges in the future. There's going to be another night. There will be more wrestling with God and more struggling to find answers. I want to take this moment to commend those students who shared in this year's God wrestling, and especially commend my beloved wife, Elizabeth, who put so much effort, so many hours behind the scenes to preparing her thoughts, collecting different commentaries, to give the students the widest possible understanding so that they can formulate their own ideas, and who has led these studies for nearly 19 years now. Israel is a nation, not an individual. We are a community of God wrestlers. None of us have all the answers, but we are comforted in knowing that we seek the answers together, respecting each other's opinions. All of you are welcome to join as we embark on a new year of wrestling with God and Torah. And I know that my wife's Zoom account is unlimited, so you don't have to worry about having a place in her class every Wednesday. Shabbat Shalom.